Hi, Mom and everyone. I'm Janelle Villanueva Lavinia, second year AB English. My report is all about language and literature, Roger Fowler and F.W. Bateson, style and verbal play by Kate Wallace. There are two sides of debate between Roger Fowler and W. Bateson about the usefulness of stylistic as an academic activity. The debate we allow, we, the debate was played out during the 1960s in the academic journal Essays in Criticism, and its individual contribution were later gathered together in Roger Fowler's collection of essays. Fowler in 1971, it was stimulated by an unfavorable review by the literary critic Helen Bendler of another of Fowler's books, Essays on Style and Language, Fowler, 1966. If W. Bateson entered the fray by adding an editorial postscript to that review, whereupon the comments with two polemical installments each from Fowler and Bateson, immortalized in stylistic folklore as the Fowler-Bateson controversy. Controversy, controversy. The confrontation between these two scholars is important because it fledgling discipline and traditional literary criticism. Then, well-established discipline. One can agree on one level with some of her comments. That is what most linguists are beginning students. 1966 and 458. Critics and linguists should welcome the fact that we have at last turned to material which inevitably forces us out of our assurance. Although the use of literature is really not the use here, not the issue here, it needs comments because critics seem to consider that linguists doing such kind of linguistic works with literature think it is critical work. The real allegation is that perhaps because of their scientific education, linguists are not equipped to know the difference between linguistic analysis and criticism, nor indeed sensitive enough to be critics. Many mathematicians and physical scientists are fine musicians and poets. There is no reason why a linguist should not be human, literate, and sensitive person. Literature and Linguistics, Roger Fowler. Mrs. Bendler, in her review, Bendler 1966 of My Essays and Style and Language, Fowler 1966, is apparently optimistic that descriptive linguistics will in the end be of immense use to literary criticism. The hostility of Mrs. Bendler's voice is depressingly familiar to those of us who have suffered from an unnecessary schism between language and literature, which has so long marred English studies. He may write on literature purely as a linguist of linguistic ends for critical motives using only selection from his linguistic apparatus, or number 3, no differently from the non-linguists without appeal to linguistics at all. The three separate approaches are all valuable, and I would urge non-linguists to state their conviction that a knowledge of linguistics must make only the first approach possible. The primary justification for the use of the methods of linguists in literary study is that noted by Mrs. Bendler 1966 to 58. The primary justification for the use of the methods of linguistics in literary study is that noted by Mrs. Bendler, 1966 to 458. Linguistics, the study of the language taught, caught, and then its contribution is unchallengeable, but this Blake logic does not allow that all specific branches of linguistics are admissible. Literature is language and therefore open to ordinary formal linguistics investigation. It has, like other formally distinctive texts, essentially distinctive context must be curious about the extra-linguistic features which conditions the distinctive styles of a literary work. Appropriateness of the model is a concern for the individual analyst. Just as important for this general discussion is that all there is no one linguistics except in community of certain basic and general ideals held since Sausaury time. Third, prescription for a successful linguistic criticism is that it should be proceed not merely from theory of language, but also from a respectful consideration of the demands and peculiarities of the many kinds of literary study. Literature and linguistics are replied by F.Y. W. Bateson. Roger Fowler is in effect proposing but both here and in the collection of essays. He edited Fowler 1966, which was reviewed by Mrs. Bendler, an academic alliance between post Sausaury linguists and post a Richard criticism. And why on earth shouldn't the a priori, as it were? It sounds a good idea. After all, even if a literary masterpiece is more than the sum of its words, still with hard, really hard at the words on the page is indeed what the modern critical doctrine of close reading amounts to, when it is reduced to its simplest terms, and since a similar concentration is the initial premise of modern descriptive linguistics, some degree of amicable cooperation between the two approaches should not be impossible. Descriptive linguistics is always at least headed towards total description, a detached, objective, universally available discipline, whatever the user's age, sex, nationality, or culture. Literature, on the other hand, has its inevitable subjective core, which tends to define the range and effectiveness of its uses. The points of departure between the two specializations from the vulgar tongue can also be put in strictly linguistic terms. Language and Literature by Roger Fowler. Mr. Bateson attempts to disqualify linguists as a discipline of relevance to literature comprise a very cunning and apparently substantial argument interwoven with a misleading line of polemic. Usual masterly fashion, he has constructed a case against which is very difficult to argue is an organized way. Number one, rests on the premises which cannot provide an adequate aesthetic for literature. Number two, is ineffective as a disqualification of linguistics because of misconception about the nature of linguistics. Number three, is motivated by a set prejudice which is inhibit constructive discussion of the present issue. Mr. Bateson's case is basically a somewhat complicated version of ideas he has offered linguists and medievalists for at least the last terms, the last 10 years. Compounds a Coleridge homely definition of poetry as the best words in the best order. B. A richer distinction between scientific and emotive language. And C. Disassociatory distinction between language and parole. The best words are the best order is except in Mr. Bateson's first book, an empty catchphrase. Coleridge used it to distinguish Barry from prose, and his requirement that the words of the media must be beautiful and ought to attract your notice becomes impertinent when the phrase is employed to mark off literature from non-literature as Mr. Bateson uses it currently. A richer distinction between emotive and scientific language is generally agreed to be without reasonable foundation. It is much too simple to serve as a linguistic theory or to provide an isolation of the characteristic of literary language. Language and parole together, according to the Saussure, make up the faculty de lengua. The lengua language is the abstract system of rules which enables a speaker to communicate with others. Parole is a particular concrete act of speech or a corpus collected from many such acts. Chomsky has recently revived and adapted the distinction using the terms competence and performance. Bateson, like the Saussure and Chomsky, says that linguists study language, which is true insofar as linguists write grammar of languages and inquire into the linguist's mental capabilities of the speakers. Mr. Bateson says the study of literature is the study of parole, or other, the study of special kind is parole of which the language is not language but style. Style and Verbal Play by Kate Wells. In this light-hearted article from 1992, Kate Wells explores the stylistic strategies pop and rock musicians use when they name their bands. Wells uncovered an array of naming practices, which, even in this relatively narrow sphere discourse activity, illustrates again how stylistic creativity can work simultaneously on a number of levels of language. The Music Master database of 1990 lists over 69,000 singles released since 1950s and is fascinating reading. The safest line is to choose popular modifier like beat, bit, bud, hot, new, red, blue, little, and sweet. For those who think pop music is meaningless, repetitive noise, then clearly names like aha, buppy, puppy K, blum, blum, kahagugo, oingo, boingo, slam, slam, yaya, and zaga, zaga might appeal. Actual suck as sounds playforms are quite rare. You might do better by punning. At least you will raise a smile. As drain, pterodactyl, idle rich, split ends, well read. Here an aid, for example, for those who think pop music sounds like the cries and noise of wild animals. It will be no surprise to learn that animal names are much more popular, like animals, balham, alligator, bats, big, pig, bonton rats, budgie cheetahs, crickets, dalmatians, elephant talk, frogs, horseflies, lion, monkeys, piranhas, reptiles, sharks in Italy, stingrays, vipers, wolfhounds, zebras, and etc., like in this picture. But perhaps because pop music is to a lot of people, Stays quiet number of names are quiet tasty and mouth-watering. Apple Jacks, Bananarama, Bread, Blanc Mish, Buckpeas, Candy, Coconuts, Famous Potatoes, Finest Ingredients, Golden Syrup, Hot Chocolate, Scrambled Eggs, Sugar Cubes, Tangerines, Vanilla Ice, Wobbly, Jellies, Whiskey, and Soda like in the picture. Issues to consider. As a follow-up to Will's entertaining paper, readers interested in general issue connected with the language of popular music might wish to consult Trudgell 1983 and Sampson in 1999. Both of these articles explore from a socio-linguistic perspective the singing styles adopted by a pop and rock musician, keeping within the same field of the scores in 2002 is an insightful analysis of metaphor in the lyric of Bob Dylan's songs Hurricane. Wells' articles concentrates on the field of discourse that is transcended by a nature where fashions change almost overnight and where an artist's popularity is measured by weeks and not years. What then is a current state of play as far as naming techniques used in rock and pop go? Are the practices identified by Wells in evidence are other techniques now used in the names of contemporary pop and rock groups, though the different decades have different characteristic naming and practices. For example, the array of stylistic strategies which Wells uncovers relates exclusively to pop and rock bands. But how widespread are these naming strategies in other musical subgenres? Are the same tendencies found in the name of, for example, jazz or folk group? And if not, why not? Do the names of albums and singles receive familiar stylistic treatment to those of bands? Is there, for examples, a correlation between having a wacky band name and giving an album comparatively wacky title? Or can there be too much stylistic wackiness in pop music naming and practices? Thank you, Mom, and everyone. Thank you, and God bless.